We got work to do.
Welcome to Highway to Hell, a supernatural podcast. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Christine.
And this week we have a very special episode with a special guest. Today we have Lynn Zubernis to talk about her new book, There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. Some of you may already know Lynn if you're listening to this and you know all about the amazing supernatural fandom. She is a clinical psychologist and a professor at Westchester University, and she's the editor of Family Don't End with Blood, which is an anthology of essays from cast and fans like you on how supernatural has changed their lives. So we're so excited to talk about her new book with Lynn. So please welcome her here.
Yay!
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I love talking about supernatural, and I will never get tired of talking about supernatural. So, yay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
It is a lot of fun talking about supernatural. I mean, we're having a blast, especially coming from, outside, from an outside perspective. We, even though I had seen the show, I had never really dealt with the fandom. And so just being introduced to the fandom has been such an amazing experience. And this is something that you write about a lot in your books.
Yeah. This is a fandom like no other. I mean, it's a show like no other as well. As of now, it's been on for 15 seasons. I know you guys are talking about season 5, which actually is one of my favorite seasons. So that's awesome. But it's been on the air for 15 seasons, which is extraordinary. But the fandom is also really extraordinary. And the relationship that has developed over all this time between the show and its cast and the fandom is extremely unique. It's really, really kind of unprecedented.
Yeah, definitely. And so I know that you talked about this in, probably on your own blog and of course in Family Don't End with Blood. But for those listeners who don't know, how did you find Supernatural?
So I actually got pulled into the show by a friend, as often happens. So I had a friend who started watching from the very beginning. She was at Comic-Con, and so she actually heard about the show before it even started, and she loved what she heard and what she saw. And during the first season, she kept telling me and my good friend Kathy, you have to watch this show, Supernatural. It's so amazing. And when we would have kind of fangirl weekends, when we'd all get together at one of our houses, she would bring not DVDs. No, that's wrong. She would bring videotapes of
That's awesome.
It was 2006. So she would bring videotapes of Supernatural and she would make us all watch them. And I liked it, but it didn't really snag me in that first season. And then, but I kept watching because it's what we talked about when we got together for our girls' weekends. And then in the very beginning of season 2, I was watching it live. I started watching it live and I was sitting there one night watching the show and I was grading papers. I remember I had a big stack of papers on my lap and I was supposed to be grading them. And I realized that I had just stopped grading completely. My pen had fallen to the floor. My mouth was hanging open. And I said to my daughter, who was kind of casually watching with me, "Oh my God, this show is so amazing." And she was like, "Mom, you've been watching this show for the past year. What is the matter with you?" But somehow it just hit me. I started to see the emotionality and the complexity of the characters and of the relationship between the brothers, and they're looking for their father. And it all just kind of became a different thing and a much deeper thing. And I literally went to my DVD set that this poor friend had given me after the first season that I had never unwrapped, tore off the plastic, and my friend Kathy and I watched the entire season 1 in this like mad weekend where we barely went to the bathroom or ate anything. And that was it.
You were hooked.
I was hooked.
Awesome.
I was hooked.
I have to say, I think that's the hardest part for me because going episode by episode and never having watched it before, it's really hard to not continue at the end of an episode, to just make myself stop until we are able to record and talk about it. And then I have to, watch the next one after the recording and pace myself. It's really hard. I just want to be able to binge
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that. I essentially have watched the whole thing in real time, even though I did go back and rewatch and
Mhm.
binge that season 1. But after that, I have watched, I think maybe I have missed seeing maybe 5 or 6 episodes live of the entire time.
Yeah, but
That's a
I
good
mean,
track record.
it is. It's so funny you say that, Lynn, your experience being introduced to the show, because it's so similar to my experience as well. I know that you've written that you're a big Buffy fan, and
Yeah.
oh my God, I love Buffy. I mean, I think I was about 10 or 11 when season 6 was on, and so that's where I kind of started watching it in real time. And then of course Angel afterwards. But I, had heard about Supernatural. I had kind of a poor opinion of it actually when I'd heard about it. I think cuz I was just mad that it kind of replaced Angel.
Mm.
Angel was canceled, and then I think a season later that's when Supernatural started, and it was like, wow, how dare they? How dare CW take the spot of my beloved show? But
Yeah.
I had put on Supernatural just because, they had said, hey, if you like Buffy, you'll like Supernatural. And I had put it on, and it was just my laundry show. It was my show that I had on while doing chores. And then what turned for me was Night Shifter. And
Oh,
just like
yeah.
you, I remember being like, whoa, this is really good. This is amazing, actually. And from there on, I was hooked.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's the same kind of experience. It's like, I don't know, something eventually you just sort of look at it with new eyes. And then once you see the quality of it, it's like, whoa, why didn't I realize this? And then, it has never lost its grasp on me from then on in.
Yeah. I think Christine, it's probably much different from you because you are going through it so slowly, and we're talking about it very critically. I don't know if it was like a one single episode switch for you, or
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I think it's kind of happened in like a series of things where I've had that moment, where it's just kind of clicked. Because I even had some of those times in season 1. There were a couple of episodes that really stood out to me and kind of spoke to me, and I was like, "All right, this is cool. I can do it." Um,
yeah.
but I've had, that's just kind of been like as we go along, there are standout episodes that really grab me. Um, so yeah, it has been different, but I can definitely see why. Because I've had other shows that do that for me too. I'm just kind of watching it, and then I'm like, oh man, okay, I get it. I'm sucked in now.
Oh no, oh no, I'm falling
Yes.
down the rabbit hole.
Yep. And I can't get out.
Yep.
Um and so you kind of mentioned, and we've been able to see it now, experiencing the fandom. It's such a big part of the show. And I think that a lot of people, and this is a very antiquated way of thinking things, right? A lot of people think fandom is for the guys, right? We think of like Star Wars and Star Trek, and even though girls rule that area definitely, and we think of sci-fi
Or we
and
think of like football or baseball or, yeah,
I
yeah,
think of video
exactly.
games.
or
That's very
Oh
video
much a
yeah.
games.
male
Yeah.
dominated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that it's just dominated by men. But what I've experienced, and I think what you've written about in your own essay, is how it's acted as a liberating experience specifically for women. So would you mind expanding on how this fandom and fandom in general really has broken gender role expectations for women?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really is fandom in general. I've mostly studied this fandom, but I've been fans of other things, and I know fans who are multi-fandom people. So it isn't just this fandom, although I think it became much more concentrated and influential in this fandom because of the way this fandom developed. But basically, I really think the reason why fandom for women has become so popular and so impactful is because women often feel a little more constricted than men as far as kind of being real in our everyday lives. We really, I mean, certainly men get messages too about how it's appropriate to behave and to express, but women, I think, often feel really constricted. I know I did. You know, I'm a mom. That's part of my identity. I'm a partner. I'm a professional. You know, what does it mean that I love a television show? But once I found the community of fandom, it was so incredibly powerful because within it, this was this whole like secret community of women in which people could be very real with each other. And it was tremendously healthy and tremendously liberating for so many of us. And I think it still is. The community plays out differently now because it's spread over multiple platforms and it's not as secret as it was when I fell into fandom 15 years ago or 20 years ago, whatever it was. But I think it still serves that function, especially for women. It's a very different kind of community with different norms and different permissions, and a lot of them allow people to be a lot more real.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because I think I was talking maybe with my husband about this, about my perfect memory is. And I, to answer truthfully, I said, my perfect memory is being alone in my room in high school and just living out my fantasies in my own head. And I was part of, the Harry Potter fandom, I think, first
I
and
was just thinking
foremost.
that same thing. That was a big one for me. The biggest,
Mm.
probably.
Yeah. And I wouldn't do fan fiction per se. I would read it for sure, but I would do online role playing and just
Hmm.
living in that space and meeting those people. Yeah, forming these bonds with these complete strangers across the world was just the utmost fun. It's I miss it. I miss that time in my life.
Yeah, and I think the reason those bonds were so compelling for so many of us is because, of course, we make friendships and relationships all throughout our lives. But when you make a friendship or a relationship between you and someone else, and you are being absolutely your real self, that is the most tremendously validating thing. If you make a friendship in your workplace, it's a great friendship, but you're probably not talking about your deepest, darkest secrets or desires or passions or fears or whatever it is. But when you're doing that, it's a very deep kind of relationship that people form, so it's compelling.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I've seen that a lot in some of the conventions that I've been to. I think it provides an environment and a space for people to express themselves. You can't dress up and cosplay at work. That's not something that is socially acceptable, but you enjoy it and it's a way for you to express yourself and live like your truth. And you can just go and bond with people who are doing the same thing.
And I think that fandom also, because its norms are different, it really encourages a type of creativity that isn't encouraged in the rest of our lives, whether it's role playing games or cosplay or writing fan fiction or making videos or making jewelry, like whatever it is. Fandom is a community that really encourages that creativity. And that's also been a big thing for lots of people who discovered fandom.
Hmm. Yeah, I think in your new book, I really connected the most to um, Amy Hutton's essay, and
Oh,
she speaks
yeah.
about that, about how she really connects, the same thing, just misses that creative side of hers, and Supernatural basically gave her the courage to find that creative pursuit again. And absolutely, I mean, i I was never I always hated English, as as a kid. I always hated that topic, but writing online fanfic and live role playing, that's what got me to where I am now. And now I work as a writer, as a technical writer
Yeah,
for.
we're both technical writers. English
Yeah.
is all you do.
Yeah,
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 exactly.
obviously, yeah. But it's true. I mean, when you're passionate about something, you are just that creativity is just pulled out of you and it doesn't feel like work anymore. I mean, I don't always enjoy, writing my syllabus or my lectures when I'm teaching, but boy do I enjoy writing these books, and I still enjoy writing fan fiction whenever I can squeeze out a little bit of time. It's a different kind of writing when you're passionate about something.
Oh,
Absolutely.
definitely. Um, well, and so you kind of mentioned so the Supernatural fandom. when it basically like in its inception, I guess, that it was more secretive. Can you talk more about how it's developed? What was it like in the early days?
It was interesting because fandom itself in the early days was limited to not nearly so many platforms. So when I discovered the Supernatural fandom, it was really, it sort of lived on the old LiveJournal blogging platform, which isn't even
Oh man,
really
live journal.
used. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Having
I mean,
flashbacks.
it was, yeah, me too. I know it was so long ago, but it was a very insular community because in that platform allowed you to be very insular. And so at the time, there was sort of the feeling of we don't want anyone to know about fandom because God knows they might ruin it. They might tell us, no, we can't do
Mm,
this or we can't talk about that or whatever. So it was kind of very secretive. And that was both good and bad. I think it was good because it did give people that perception of a safe space that was relatively safe, but
mhm.
it also, the reason we were keeping it secret was also sometimes because there was shame around it, and that
That's what
wasn't
I
so
was gonna
healthy.
say. I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
how it came across to me, especially because I was very young when I was on LiveJournal, and so were my friends, and it was we didn't spread around our LiveJournal names because you didn't want people at school to read what you had on there.
Right.
It was
Mm,
embarrassing.
Right. Right, exactly. And that the shame part of it wasn't good, but it was really a very validating place because it was so secret and kind of so cloistered. So I think it was both positive and negative. Now fandom is spread over multiple platforms, and I think it's a little harder to find that sense of community. The fandom is larger, so you find community within whatever platform you're
mhm.
kind of living on. And each of those fandoms on each of the different platforms has different characteristics. But the good thing is people are much less ashamed of fandom. People are much more likely to be like, yep, I'm a Supernatural fan and my office is covered with posters and photo ops and I don't care. And I think that's healthy.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
actually
I as a
that
grown adult have Harry Potter posters
yeah.
in my office.
I have
Yes.
I have Supernatural posters in my office. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
great, isn't
definitely have
it? Go
a
us.
Slytherin banner in my office.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of us, yay.
Yes. We've gotten there for
um
sure.
yeah, that's so true. I remember in high school, and I think I've told this story on the podcast before, that I was wearing a Slytherin t-shirt that I had gotten from Hot Topic, and just some guy came up to me and just started laughing at my shirt. And I'm just like, what? Like, there's nothing wrong with this. But now,
Dude.
yeah, but now of course it's like, it's Harry Potter is a hugely accepted
Right.
fandom.
Now
And
you get fist bumps from fellow Slytherins.
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
for
As
sure.
it should be.
Right.
Yeah. How interesting. Well, and so you sit on the editorial board of the peer-reviewed Journal of Fandom Studies, which
Mhm.
Catherine Larson, your longtime writing partner, she serves as the editor. And I went to the latest call for papers because I just got out of school. I just graduated last year. Um, and I
Congrats.
miss I thank you. When I miss the academic world, I miss all of these reading the journals and all of that. So I was very curious, and this latest call for papers requests the following topics. So some of them include historical perspectives on collecting fan material in libraries and archives, archival work, such as collection of fan letters, fanzine collections, or online archives, and also competing histories of fan practices and fan studies. I've got to tell you, Lynn, I've never heard of, these um this work basically of collecting fan items and all of this, and I'm just fascinated by it. It seems like there's a surge in documenting fandoms. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's become even more important because so many of the historic platforms are disappearing, and with it, so much of the work. I mean, there's a reason that Archive of Our Own was created as a way to try to preserve fan works across all these multiple platforms, but that's only a fraction of the works within a fandom, and it's not all, but it's mostly written works like fan fiction. There's so much out there, especially from the early days of fandom, that is in danger of disappearing. And it's kind of a history that we won't be able to get back if we don't find a way to capture it in some way. So, I mean, fan studies as a field is very young. When I got into it 15 years ago, it was such a small field that, my field is psychology. I'm a psychologist. So I didn't study fan studies. That's not what my PhD is in. So I actually had to sort of go back and learn the field of fan studies in order to be able to do the research I've done. But at that time, you could go backwards and like read everything there was published in the entire field. It has exploded in the past 15 years. Like you could never do that now. It wouldn't be feasible. But with that has come the knowledge that things are changing quickly and platforms are changing quickly and technology is changing quickly. And we need to find a way to preserve our history.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. Uh-huh. And so we go to Supernatural Wiki all the time. We know of it, and it's extremely extensive. It has everything on there, links, tweets from some of the cast while they were filming certain episodes. It's amazing. But what are some other ways that Supernatural or other fandoms are being archived?
I mostly follow Supernatural fandom, honestly. I mean, but the kind of projects that they're looking for contributions for in the journal is multi fandom across fandoms, just like Archive of Our Own is across fandom. So there's very little at this point that is fandom specific. Back in the old days, there was Leaky Cauldron, and there were things that were specific to the Harry Potter fandom, and there were things that were specific to the Supernatural fandom. Now, most things are multi fandom type archives, which I think is good. And that's trying to pull in things that, from shows that, or books or films or whatever that haven't been active in a long time, but there's just a rich history out there that needs to be pulled in with the net.
Yeah. And looking back at the Supernatural fandom, are there any specific trends that you think have emerged throughout the years, either through fan practices or fan theories, maybe attitudes toward the show? Especially since you have been watching the show alongside everyone for so long.
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. I mean, it is very fascinating and I try to kind of take a step back and watch the fandom as a researcher. I mean, I'm always getting grief for following all kinds of people on Twitter, but I do it because that's the only way to really know what's going on in the entire fandom. If you just follow people who are like-minded people who are your friends, you're going to have absolutely no idea what's actually going on in the larger world of that fandom. Right. So I try to yeah, exactly. And I mean, most people on social media live in a vacuum, and that's fine. But if you really kind of want to know what's going on from a researcher standpoint, you can't live in a vacuum because that's going to give you a skewed perspective. So have there been trends throughout the years? Yes. But interestingly, I feel like they're kind of repeating trends that are just played out with different specifics. So in the very beginning, there's always fandom is a group. And any group is going to divide itself into subgroups. And when people are very passionate about things, those subgroups are going to be in group and out groups. And you're going to try to demonize people in the out group so that your in group can feel better. And that has been a dynamic in fandom forever, and in the Supernatural fandom forever. And in the beginning, that kind of played out between Sam girls and Dean girls. So those were the factions, either people who love Dean or people who love Sam. And then after a while, it started to be more around shipping. So in the beginning, when there was just Dean and Sam, either you shipped Dean and Sam or you said, what the hell? And you didn't ship Dean and Sam. And so those were two factions. And then, what are you in season 5? Okay, I'm safe. And then Castiel came along. And then I'm trying not to be spoilery. Yes. And then that was a whole new ship. So then it was either you ship Dean and Castiel, or you ship Sam and Dean, or you ship nobody, or, it's been the same in-group, out-group dynamic the whole time. And it can get very contentious. And it's always kind of fascinated me and dismayed me at the same time, because we all have so much more in common than we do things that keep us apart. But it's a part of, group dynamics that I don't think is ever going to change. So the same things have played out. They've just had different categories in them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the shipping and the, Dean girl, Sam girl can be seen in any fandom. I mean, it's like, are you an angel girl or are you a spike girl? I mean,
Absolutely. And were you a
it's
Spuffy shipper or were, yeah. So yeah, it's the same.
yeah. And it's funny because, even though I have seen the show before, um, even though I'm not the newbie in this dynamic where Christine is watching the show for the first time, I definitely do feel like I'm a newbie because we are being introduced to the fandom. It's completely new to me, and so we're slowly immersing ourselves more and more in what's going on. Mostly through Twitter and meeting all of these people like yourself, like Alana King, and others, and it's just it's shocking because before I had no idea that this was here, and to see such a thriving community, it's like wow, like where have I've been missing this for so long.
And I mean, I think there's plenty of people who watch the show and just love the show and don't feel pulled to join the fandom. But because the show has been around for such a long time, the fandom is particularly active. And because the show has had conventions for 13 years, the fans and the actors have kind of a uniquely close relationship. So even if you didn't know about fandom before, it's kind of hard not to when the actors at this point know about it and talk about it and appreciate it. So it's become even more visible.
Yeah, the fandom definitely seems like a microcosm in some ways. What do you think makes the supernatural fandom so unique from other fandoms?
I mean, I don't think it would have been unique from other fandoms had not the show evolved in the way it evolved. So it's partly an artifact of the show and the fandom have just been around for such a long time. But really, I think the thing that made the fandom so different from so many others was that reciprocal relationship with the cast. There has never been another television show, including Star Trek, even, that has had the number of conventions that this show has had. There's never been a cast that couldn't really sustain any level of stereotyping around their fans because they see them every 2 weeks and have for the past 13 years. So it really did become very different, much more reciprocal. And that changed the character of the fandom and the way they think about the cast and the way they interact with the cast. So we've come so far from what I was talking about before, kind of this cloistered community where the rule was you never talk about fandom to the actors. Like that was an absolute taboo. When we wrote our first books, Fangasm, Supernatural Fangirls, and Fandom at the Crossroads, we knew we were breaking every rule of fandom by going to the actors and talking to them about fandom and asking them what they thought about fandom and divulging things when they asked that we knew we technically weren't supposed to be divulging. That is very, very different now in this fandom.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
first
have
rule
to
of Fight
say.
Club is you don't talk about Fight Club.
Exactly, exactly. That was the rule. First rule of fandom: you don't talk about fandom. Yeah, that's an icon in Fangasm.
And I have to say, it's really interesting to me too because, obviously I'm still getting into it. I'm still viewing it for the first time. I have been to a convention. I had to stick my fingers in my ears a lot and leave the room. But it was still such an amazing experience because I'm a Star Trek girl and I've been to Star Trek conventions and it was a totally different dynamic. And
Hmm.
I'm still trying to. I mean, I think this conversation with you is helping me kind of get some perspective on it because I that does seem like there's no wall. There's nothing between the actors and the rest of the people in that room. And even at a lot of the conventions I've been to before for other fandoms, there is kind of always this like, I don't know, unspoken rule, right? This maybe like sense of decency or something that people have to uphold to like not cross that line. And I'm seeing people over here like hugging cast members, or they're being pulled aside and like having conversations like, oh, I've seen, like they're like friends.
Yeah, because I mean,
And
and
it
that's
just was
that's
so
an
different.
it is. And I really think that is so much of the, I mean, I think the Supernatural cast are a bunch of wonderful people. I know them a little bit now, having worked with 30 of them or something on these books. So I feel like I kind of know them personally now, and they are really good people. But a lot of it is just the artifact of either you're a stranger or you're not a stranger. You know, if you're on a show that does 2 conventions a year, you don't know those people. Those fans are strangers. They feel like they know you, but you don't know them. Whereas if you do Supernatural conventions once a month or twice a month and you see the same people all the time, they do feel like friends. They're familiar to you. So you're not gonna keep those boundaries up in the same way because they don't feel like strangers. It's just kind of
Right.
human nature.
And it's different too now because it definitely is like a whole group of people who are all doing that together on both sides. Like it's not just the one ultimate fan who follows every convention.
Oh no, 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 no.
It's definitely a group, an entire community of people who all see each other, fairly regularly through these events.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's pretty
I
amazing.
like I said, it's unprecedented. That has never happened before. I mean, I take the books to most of the conventions, so I'm in the vendor room. I'm a vendor now, and those of us who are vendors at Supernatural cons, like I see those people once or twice a month, like, and I have for
Right.
years and years. I miss them when we just run up to each other and hug when we see each other because we miss each other. It's that regular.
Right. And the other part of that that's interesting too is, watching this for the first time, it was pretty shocking to me how much already, and up to season 5, the show has incorporated so much of the energy and the input from the fandom into the show itself. And Kristen kind of warned me, before we started, like, you're going to start seeing some of this come into play. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. It is cool.
It is. It
Spoiler alert for
is.
everybody else who hasn't seen it already. It was so interesting to me because I'll see that in other shows sometimes, like, oh, that's funny. It's, they're alluding to, this one thing that happened or whatever, but it's kind of constant with this show now. They're always like making updates based on feedback they got from fans, or they're making fun of themselves because of like a collective like fan reaction that happened to something they did in the past that they want to like recognize publicly. It's just really interesting to see it happen in the show itself. They're not afraid to go there.
No, they were one of the first shows to do that. I still remember one of the first times that I was on the Supernatural set was when they were filming Monster at the End of This Book, which you have seen,
So good.
which
Yes.
was, yes, and which was one of the most meta, one of the first, really super meta episodes. And when Kathy and I got to the set and they, brought our chairs out and our headsets and whatever, and then the PA kind of leaned over and said to us, understand something. This episode is all your fault because you've been talking to Kripke way too much. And we were like, oh, like we thought for a minute, oh my God, we're in such trouble. But then we saw what she meant. And we had been talking at the time to Eric Kripke about, so he did know
That
maybe
is
more
so
than the
funny.
average showrunner. And he's brilliant. And he just slapped it right into the show.
Yeah, and everybody loves a good breaking of the fourth wall, and they just do it
Oh
over
yeah.
and over and over again, and it's amazing. That is so funny. I love that that you were there for that.
You should have seen our faces when they said, "This is your fault." We had a moment of, "Oh my God, we're going to be
Oh God.
killed. What's going to happen?"
That's amazing.
And I guess is it true though that in season 2 that the Joe relationship with Dean kind of was cooled off because of fans' reactions to that? It's just interesting to hear that it was happening so early on, but also that that there's this kind of dance with that
Yeah,
of like cast and fan interaction.
yeah. I mean, I think so. Judging by what Eric Kripke has actually said to me, instead of, because who knows, if somebody hasn't told you, you can only speculate. But he clearly from the beginning, when he was the showrunner, paid more attention than most. He went to the the posting boards. He knew what was going on. He asked us a ton of questions, so he really did want to know. And there were definitely times when the show pivoted to some extent in response to fandom reaction. But the thing that he said at one time, and it's always stuck with me, is that it's not as much of a pivot as you would think, because turning around a television show is like turning around the Titanic when the iceberg is like 10 feet ahead of you. Like you can't do that. They're filming, 5, 10 episodes ahead of what's airing, and the 5 after that are already written. So it's not an immediate kind of response like that. But with some big things like changing the trajectory of where they were going to go with Joe, or changing sort of the emphasis on Bella as a character in season 3, there have certainly been times when they have made a kind of a large scale pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then even with season 3 itself, having the writer's strike happen and kind of changing the direction of the war. So all these outside forces kind of playing in, but I guess that's kind of, that's the magic of the show, right? You have all these little pieces from history, from either the fans or, things that are happening around that time to kind of influence the show, and just kind of gives it a little bit more flavor, I like to think.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a healthy level of interaction. I don't think you want a show to be written by the fans, because fans are never, like I
Agreed.
said, we're never on the same page. There are 15 different pages that fandom is on at any given time. So
Yeah.
how would you know which part to follow?
Well, and I'm
but I
sorry.
think,
Let's just look at poor Star Wars. They've
yeah,
really had
exactly.
it
Thinking
so
that
hard.
exactly. Oh my God.
Exactly. Case in point.
Why'd you have to mention it, Christine,
I'm
again?
sorry.
I'm still upset.
So sorry. It's
Oh.
just they have maybe, I think, the hardest fandom. The hardest.
It's pretty tough. Yeah.
It's so tough. And I my friends who are Star Wars fans just want everybody to just lay off. Can we all just kumbaya, please, and take it for what
I
it
feel
is?
for them. I do. I feel for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
It's funny because about 2 weeks ago, I was in Barnes and Noble and I was waiting to pay for a book. And sure enough, the newest Entertainment Weekly special Supernatural edition was up on a shelf. And I heard the 2 girls behind me go, "Is that show still on?" And
That just happened to me recently too. I was telling
Really?
somebody about our podcast, and he was like, "Is that still on?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's like 15 seasons." He was like, "Oh my God," because he had started watching it through, I don't know, season 10 or something, and then fell off.
Yeah, and I hear that all the time. And so I guess for those non-viewers, Lynn, first off, like I don't know, how do you get that a lot? Do you experience that a lot? Or I don't know, it's just very curious that people's reaction is instantly like that. But also, how would you describe the Supernatural fandom to those who haven't experienced it?
Yes, I do. I do definitely hear that. And I think one of the interesting things also about the Supernatural fandom is there are a significant number of people who dropped out. Like the number of people who are still in the fandom and have been in the fandom since season 1 or season 2 is significant. But there's also a significant number of people who stopped watching after season 5 or season 10 or whatever. But new people have continued to come on board. So it's a very vibrant fandom because it's always got a lot of new energy in it, along with the people who have been there for a long time. So that's kind of a unique thing about the fandom too. As far as describing the fandom, I would say that it is one of the most passionate fandoms, that and that it also is probably the most closely connected with its cast of any fandom. I think those are the 2 things that really distinguish it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned a lot of people might fall off of after season 5, right? And I wonder if those are the purists that believe only Kripke can really write the show. I'm really excited, and I've been kind of, warning Christine, hey, we're going to have a change in showrunners pretty soon, just like Buffy did. And, of course, when Buffy changed over to season 6, Marty Noxon was really like vilified. I was too young to really get that sense, or I was not part of the fandom at that time. But afterwards, kind of looking at it and hearing about it, I just learned that she just really was not well respected because of the changes in tone and all of that. I mean, I'm a season 6 person though. I love season 6, and so much very similar. I appreciate season 6 of Supernatural. I actually really like it, and so we're getting to that point, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So I wonder if you also kind of see that in the change of showrunners, because I think there's like 2 or 3 other showrunners
3
that
others.
that
Yeah.
Supernatural goes through.
Yeah. And absolutely, there are people who watched for the first 5 seasons and then tapped out. The first 5 seasons are definitely different. The next couple of seasons under Sarah Gamble have kind of their own flavor. I happen to be a huge Sarah Gamble fan. I love the
Same.
Magicians too. I love everything she does. But were those different than the Kripke years? Yeah, they were different. I don't think they were as different because Kripke was still very much involved, and he and Sarah had worked together so closely for such a long time. But then when Jeremy Carver became the showrunner, the show definitely changed. There were definitely changes that happened, and some people loved them, and some people said, "Where's my show? What has happened to it?" And I think with each change of showrunner, there have been people who have fallen off, but there's also people who discovered the show during that time and kind of came on board with that as the template and then went backwards. So they're seeing it kind of in a different way.
Yeah, I wonder if, because season 6 of Buffy was my first season, if it wouldn't have been, if I would have had a different opinion of it for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, my experience with Buffy watching from the beginning, and I wasn't really a part of the fandom. I just was a big fan of the show, but I did not like the change. I think it's very hard when you are really passionately in love with a show and you love it for the reasons that exist. When it changes, obviously that's going to be a bump in the road, right? I mean, when you love something and you love it the way it is, you're not going to want it to change. That's just human nature. So I think always for people who have been watching continuously, it's a very different experience than people who jump on at a different point.
Well, I get that. I mean, I've told Kristen about this many times, but I loved Angel and watched it from the beginning. And then there came a time where I could not watch it anymore. I was done. And I've been done. I could never go back and finish it. And it was so disappointing to me. It's a wound.
It is.
You
No,
know?
it's painful because it's something
Yeah.
that's important. It's totally painful. And I feel kind of very lucky that I tend to be very fandom monogamous. Like I love one thing at a time, really. I don't maybe because I'm so busy, I just don't have time to be passionate about more than one thing at a time.
Sure, yeah.
But I feel very grateful that I've stayed passionate about Supernatural. I won't spoil anything. I haven't been as passionate about the last couple of seasons. There's been more frustration, but even in the midst of that frustration, there have always been episodes that I love, and I maintain my very passionate love for the characters. So I feel grateful that that has transcended, 4 different showrunners and different eras of the show.
Yeah, that's really great. And I have to say, too, with Supernatural, I'm pretty hopeful still because Sarah Gamble and Jeremy Carver, although not the showrunners so far through season 5, I've loved every episode that they have been writers on. Inevitably, as we go through each episode on our podcast, we start looking into who the writers are, and we talk about that at the top of the podcast episode. And if it's one that we really loved, we both come in and we're like, oh man, I loved this episode. Oh, well, it was Sarah Gamble, so no wonder.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I
and that
am
happens
very,
over and over again.
Yeah, I am very much attuned to which are my favorite writers and which writers write the characters in the way that sort of is my own head canon for them, because those are the writers that the episodes are going to feel really good to me.
So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful for sure. Even when they take over, I'm kind of excited to see what that's like because I've liked what they've done so far.
And all the showrunners were writers on the show first. So it's not like they ever brought anybody in kind of from the outside.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, Supernatural is ending now. It's right now. They've kind of stopped filming during this whole coronavirus outbreak. But season 15 is the last season that they are filming. And you do write in your new book about what that experience was, learning that the show would be ending.
Yeah.
How was that for you? What did you feel in that moment?
That's a moment that I am not going to forget for a long, long, long time, because the show has been so important to me for such a long time. I'm not just the fictional characters in the show itself, which is super important, but it's also been, professionally important. I've published 6 books on the show. I've gotten to know the cast. It's just important to me on so many levels. I go to conventions as a vendor all the time. So it was pretty huge. And I didn't know that it was going to be happening at the end of season 15. I thought that it was probably going to happen at the end of season 16, so I wasn't, completely unprepared. But I don't think anything can really truly prepare you for something that is going to be as big a loss as that. So it's one of those like moments that'll be, kind of, I write about it in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. It's kind of a flashbulb moment, one of those moments that you remember like everything that was happening at that time, and you can still see like the people around you. It's a very visual memory. And I was vending at a convention, and my friend Kim was helping me, and in the middle of just talking with somebody who was buying a copy of Family Don't End with Blood, she just kind of pulled me aside and said, "You need to take a break right now. You need to go to the bathroom. You need to get on your phone, get on Twitter. Don't come back. Take your time. I've got this." And as soon as she said that,
Oh,
I knew.
man.
I knew what it was. I absolutely knew.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I found out. I stood in the bathroom at Lexington Comic Con and pulled up Twitter and watched the video of Jared, Jensen, and Misha. And then we all cried for the rest of the convention. So it was a good place to be, because I was with fellow fans, and people came up to
Absolutely.
the table the whole weekend. A lot of people came by who wouldn't have come by just to say, "I have Family Don't End with Blood. It meant a lot to me. The shows meant a lot to me. I just want to stand here with you and kind of process." So yeah, it was tough.
Yeah. It was nice to be amongst people that understood that grief as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because that idea of the flashbulb memory, I couldn't say that have that for Supernatural when I found out, but I do remember that moment when I found out that Angel was canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that distinct memory of, it was like 6 a.m. I was listening to K Rock, the radio station I used to listen to back when I lived in LA, and they said, "Yep, it's canceled, and that's it." And I remember being very upset because, of course, they weren't able to really write the ending that they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found out Supernatural was ending, I kind of had a different reaction where it was more relief, but relief in a way where I was like, they will do the show justice in being able to end it the way they want it, because we still had all season 15 to do that.
Yeah,
And
which
so,
is a luxury for a show, really.
yes, yeah, exactly. And so that was kind of comforting for me in that moment, I think.
The really hard thing now is not knowing for sure what's going to happen. And they filmed up through episode 18, and they were just starting to film episode 19, so they had, 2 episodes essentially left to film, and nobody really knows what's going to happen at this point.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
everything is so up in the air.
Sometimes the best laid plans.
Mhm. Crazy. Well, and so your book has it's a collection of essays from fans, from cast members who are processing the end of Supernatural and what Supernatural has meant to them.
Hmm.
How did you go about finding the different individuals for which they wrote these essays?
So that's the hardest part because I could have made this book like encyclopedia length because honestly, like hundreds of people could have written a chapter for this book, but obviously you're limited if you're going to publish a book. What we tried to do, and I kind of did this in Family Don't End with Blood as well. I wanted to put together a book. I mean, the whole purpose in publishing There'll Be Peace When You Are Done was to give the fandom and the cast, as a matter of fact, something to kind of hang on to really remember this show by and to celebrate it and just to remember how special it was and how unique it was. So it was important to me that there be chapters in it written by people that everybody who read it could relate to. So I really wanted to make it as diverse as possible. With Family Don't End with Blood, most of the people who wrote chapters, as far as the cast, were the people who I knew really well because they were the people who did the conventions. So I knew them, I knew they had stories. It was easy for me to kind of pull it together with those people. But for this one, I was really much more planful in trying to find people, both fans and actors, who had a different perspective. So, people wrote from the standpoint of diversity as far as race and disability and ethnicity and sexuality and just every type of diversity that we could think of, because I really wanted everybody to find themselves in this book. If this was going to be the last book that kind of wrapped the show and gave everybody something to hang on to, I didn't want anybody to be left out. So that was a very conscious effort for this book, and I think that we did a really good job of that, and that everybody will find something that they can relate to. That's what I'm hoping.
I love that.
Yeah. So far I've definitely seen that. I it's funny because we just, like I had mentioned, we just filmed or recorded Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, where we have that scene with Bobby in the wheelchair kind of kicking ass with a shotgun. And we talked a little bit about it on our podcast episode about how important that is. And sure enough, one of your essays, and forgive me, I forget who it was that wrote about it, mentioned that scene.
Vicky McCoy.
Vicky McCoy wrote about it and mentioned how important it was to her. And it, yeah, I mean, it seemed like a very important scene. And I'm glad that it was meaningful for someone.
Yeah. And that's really that's what I was trying. I mean, of course, Jared and Jensen wrote, and I think it's important for Jared and Jensen to have their feelings in there. And Misha also wrote a little message. Misha was super, super busy. We had very little time to pull this together. And he tried so hard to write a longer thing. And in the middle of the cookbook tour, he couldn't write a longer thing, but he still included a message that is heartfelt and I think meaningful. So those three, obviously, we were going to include, but the rest of the people all had something very unique to say and a unique perspective to write from.
And I was going to say, I love that, your thought was making it something that everyone can relate to and find themselves in. But in doing that too, what you're also doing is giving whoever reads it a really kind of um, wrapped up view of the show as a whole. If you're having people individually write about all the different types of representation in the show, all the different, difficult topics or anything that, can be like individually relatable, that's something that has been tackled by the show. It's really something that they've taken on and done well and should be acknowledged in kind of a book that's supposed to be about the end, and the thing as a whole. So it's touching two really big things. I think you're accomplishing two really big things there.
Yes, absolutely. The whole focus on the evolution of the show. When I, contacted all of the actors and fans to write their chapters, I said I want to do two things. I want to kind of recognize the evolution of the show, and that means not glossing over things that maybe were problematic at one time, but also really celebrating how far the show has come in terms of evolution and especially in terms of representation. And then also being something that everyone can find themselves in. So that's literally what they were writing about. And then lastly, I wanted them to all weigh in about what they think the legacy of the show will be. So those were the 3 points. And I think everybody who wrote did just a spectacular job of being real and being open and being genuine, but also really being thoughtful about those things. And I can't say enough about the hard work that people put into it, because very few people who wrote chapters are actually writers. There are a couple who are, but most people are not writers. So this was a real big undertaking for them.
And I actually wanted to ask you about that. I mean, in getting these essays from people, are they actually, like, what's the method for getting those thoughts onto paper? Are they actually taking the time to sit down and write this out? Are you helping them take the thoughts that they have and put it onto paper? Like, what's the
Depends on the
method
person.
there?
So some people just wanted to write from scratch and wanted to write the whole thing and just have it be 100% theirs, and then would send it to me for feedback and editing. And maybe I would say, you know, are you sure you want to say this? Or maybe we want to say something different. I tend to be very protective of the people who are contributing to my book. So there's a lot of that dynamic back and forth, especially with the actors. So that was the vast majority of people. Some people that would have been really hard. They had a lot of ideas, but they're not writers, and sitting down and typing would have been really difficult. So some people we talked on the phone or talked in person and kind of got thoughts together. And then I sent those thoughts to them and they massaged them into how they would like them to be. A couple of them we left in interview format because that's the way they were done. And I thought they kind of worked really well as a conversation and sort of broke up the tone of the book. So there's a couple that were interviews. So it was kind of a mix of things. Jared and Jensen's have stuff in them that they've talked about before, either in interviews or maybe at a convention or something. And then also original stuff that they added in. So it's kind of a mix.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And you kind of, mentioned how the show has evolved. I mean, we're definitely seeing that. I think in the first episode, Dean's a total creep. He's not a very sympathetic character.
No, he was never a creep. What are you talking about? That's my favorite fictional character. Oh my God.
No, definitely. How dare you?
I'm traumatized now.
It's okay. We still love him.
No, we absolutely love him. And
I'm kidding you. He was a bit of a jerk.
Just the way, there's these chick flick moments that they kind of make fun of, all of that. And I really enjoyed what you said about how the show has evolved. You stated the show itself, quote, the show itself began to reflect its own fandom a little more accurately. And in the diversity of those characters, many fans found that elusive thing called representation in their favorite show. End quote. And it's beautifully put, how that has impacted the fans and of course the cast as well. But how would you say it has impacted television as a whole?
Ooh. That's a good question, because Supernatural actually came on the air at a very interesting time just for television in general, too. It came about at the time that the internet was becoming ubiquitous for all of us. So it really did kind of grow up with the internet, and its fandom grew up with the internet. So I think it's had an impact on television in that it did things and broke new ground that shows had not done before. And now some of those things are not unusual. So they've just kind of, been molded into the world of television. They don't seem groundbreaking anymore. But Supernatural was the first to do a lot of them.
Yeah, definitely.
I could see that.
Uh-huh.
And we've kind of talked about that on the podcast sometimes too. If there's a new topic they bring up or something that's done on the show where we're like, oh, right. Okay, so let's put this in the context of 2007.
Yeah, you do. You really have to think about what the time period was. When they did the meta episodes that they had done, that was something completely new that seemed crazy at the time. And a lot of it was because they never knew whether they were going to be, they always kind of thought, this is probably our last season. So let's not worry about it. Let's just do our own thing.
And there's kind of some weird freedom
renewed.
that comes with that.
Yeah, exactly. That allowed them to, break some boundaries and break some ground that they probably wouldn't have otherwise. And then the passionate fandom would rally, and they'd get renewed anyway. So.
Well, and in closing, what's next step for fans as Supernatural ends?
I mean, I think everybody needs to go through a bit of a grieving process. It's interesting. I'm in the middle of teaching a graduate course on grief and loss right now. So I've been using Supernatural's ending. It's a great course. I love teaching it. I've been using a lot of examples from grieving a television show because it's not the kind of grief and loss that we think of stereotypically when we think of grief and loss, but it is a real loss. I don't think everything is going to disappear. The fandom community is going to remain. I mean, just like the Harry Potter fandom community still exists and the Star Trek fandom still exists, but will it be different? Yes, it'll be extremely different. There won't be current canon to talk about. There won't be disagreements about where the show should go or what should happen. There won't be that kind of passionate discussion that goes on a daily basis. There won't be conventions anymore after, well, who knows when there will be another convention right now. But if the world goes back to normal, then maybe there will be some more. But it'll never be the sort of, it won't have the immediacy that it has had. And that's something that has to be grieved. Just the loss of the fictional characters and the closing of the canon and knowing that in some sense, those fictional characters don't exist anymore in the same way. Like they're not out there living their lives and, having more adventures. That's all got to be grieved. Right. And that's a process. I do think that for many people, the friendships and the connections that they've made through the show and through the fandom are certainly going to outlast the fandom. I know I've got friends that I made through this fandom who are going to be my friends forever. And it's not just about Supernatural, but it's a lot of change. And I think it's not just the fandom that's going to go through the grieving process. It's certainly the cast as well. And I've had some conversations with them about it. This is really hard for them too, especially those that have been on the show for a really long time.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine because that's how much of your life that you've spent with those people, playing that person. Yeah.
Yeah. And I am really, truly hoping that hanging on to an actual book that has all these people's thoughts who are the ones who made the show important for you and all the people who responded to the show in the way that you did, that being able to hold on to that will really help in that grieving process, because that's something that we all need. We need something to kind of take us forward that we can still hang on to. So I'm hoping that There Will Be Peace When You Are Done is that thing for the fandom and for the cast as well.
I'm sure it will.
Absolutely. And do you personally have any things or projects that you would like to do or see happen throughout the fandom now that the show is ending?
I've been so focused on getting this book done in negative amount. I don't think a book has ever been published as quickly as this book. When I brought it to the publisher and told them when the show was ending, everybody just turned ghostly pale and was like, is this a bad joke? I mean, literally everyone had a heart attack. So we're still we have just pulled this together. It went to the printer literally a week ago. So no, I haven't.
Wow, good job.
I have not. I mean, we barely got it in under the wire, guys. Barely. But I have not really thought past it.
That's crazy. That sounds
Thank you.
Insane.
Yeah, it was very, very insane. But it's done and it's going to come out on time. So yay. But I haven't really thought past that. As a matter of fact, I have said to a number of people after putting this together in such an insane time frame, that's it. I'm never writing another book. I'm never doing anything ever again. But I already know that that's probably a big lie. So there will be something else, but I don't know what it'll be yet.
Of course. And well, There Will Be Peace When You Are Done is set to come out in May 2020, thanks to you handling those time constraints. And I understand folks can already pre-order their books. Where can they do that through?
They can pre-order it at the website peacewhenyouaredone.com. And actually, if people think that they're going to buy it anyway, they should do the pre-order because the publisher has set it up so that if you order through that website and you give them your proof of purchase, they will send you free things, including a download of the gorgeous cover art that Christine Griffin did for the book. It's beautiful. So the cover art without, the title, the printing and all of that is just this beautiful piece of artwork. It's got Sam and Dean represented by their silhouettes in the Impala. It's got Castiel represented by these majestic angel wings in the sky, kind of watching over them, and the car driving past the mile markers on the road. It's just amazing. It's so emotional. So you get that for free, and you get some behind the scenes stories of some of my misadventures on the Supernatural set too.
Yeah, it is really beautiful.
I want to check it out. I'm looking at it.
I'm in awe of her. She's just so good. Like, she sent me the cover and I just burst into tears because it was just so
lovely.
Isn't it so beautiful?
Yes.
It's so beautiful. Yeah.
Driving into the sunset.
Yeah.
Yes, I can't get over it. The mile markers say 2005 and 2020.
I know. Doesn't it kill you? It kills me every time I look at it. But yeah, but you get that for free, which is a really nice bonus.
Yeah.
Beautiful. We'll definitely promote that.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for coming on the show and talking about your new book and the fandom. This has been such a joy.
Yes, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. This is talking about Supernatural is something I never get tired of doing. And please hit me up. I'll come back and talk about wherever you are in your current viewing season too. That would be fun.
That would be great.
Yes, we would love that.
Awesome.
All right. Well, until next time, we'll see you on the highway to hell.